Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm here today, and I'm going to be preaching part of a series on missions from Matthew. And this one will be from the text of Matthew 2, verses 1 to 12. And I'd like to entitle, Was It Worth the Trip? Have you ever decided to go on a trip? How did you decide where to go? Did you factor in the cost, distance to travel, and then determine if it was worth it? You know, maybe you've been on a special trip, maybe even a honeymoon if you're married like I am, and maybe you've been on a once-in-a-lifetime trip and you chose a very special location, a very special place, and a special time. And you factored in the cost, the distance, and that's how you decided where you were going to go. Did you go in a special time of year or for a special event? Some events take place only a certain time of year, and people travel to see them, right? So today, I'd like to look at a very special trip. It was more than a trip, it was a mission. It was a once-in-a-lifetime trip, and it was an important mission. And it's from our text, Matthew 2, 1 to 12. Let's look at our text. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him. So here we see the wise men, they're coming from the east, and they are coming to Jerusalem. They're traveling on this journey, and they have a mission to worship him. So we see they'd come on a long journey through a land that was sometimes hostile to their own. Now, at this time in history, they were probably coming from the region occupied by Parthia. Parthia was a rival empire to Rome. The borders changed at various times. There had been several wars with Rome already. There would be more wars later. It was a long-lasting enemy of Rome, Parthia was. Yet there were also long times of peace, and there would have been peace at this time. However, no one knew when something might happen. So these people were traveling from a large distance in a hostile land where hostilities could break out and they could be arrested or something happen in a foreign land. This was not a small trip. This was a somewhat dangerous journey. And they were traveling from this land to Jerusalem. Perhaps they had heard of Balaam's prophecy in their homeland. Daniel was, of course, a member at one time of perhaps these wise men of the East, and maybe from him, through other sources, they may have heard of Balaam's prophecy. And he had said in Numbers 24:17, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel, and it shall crush the forehead of Moab and break down the sons of Sheth. And this prophecy contained the idea of the star. And so they'd seen this star in the east, and they realized this was a fulfillment of the prophecy, and so they came. They came to find him, they came to worship him, and that was their mission. And it was a long journey. So here, carrying on in our text, when Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. They told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it is written by the prophet, and you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. It's interesting here. We see a strange contrast. The wise men, they're pagan, they're heathen. They're excited to find the new king, but Herod is troubled, and all of Jerusalem. The pagans were seeking answers, but the ones who knew the prophecy had apparently little interest. They came to get answers to find out where the king was, but those who already had the answers weren't interested. The Gentiles were more engaged in this search than the ones who were supposed to be the main beneficiaries of the promise. Think about that. The Messiah was to be the King of the Jews. Yes, he would bring salvation to the Gentiles if you see all the Old Testament scriptures, but primarily he was the deliverer of the Jews, and yet the Gentiles were more interested in his birth than the Jews were, or the religious leaders of the time. As John put it, he came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. John chapter 1, verse 11. Why? Why do we see this strange contrast between Herod and the Jewish leaders and the Magi's? Well, the main reason is they had their own kingdom and agenda, which this king might upset. The wise men didn't have an agenda. They were coming to see this king. They were coming to see why he was born. They didn't have their own kingdom. Herod and the religious leaders saw them as a threat because of their own agenda and their own kingdom. And this made what should have been a source of joy for them into a source of fear. It should have been a source of joy. Think about that. All of the history of Israel, from the time of Abraham up until now, it was all leading to the birth of the Messiah. And yet here the Messiah is born, and they're troubled by it instead of rejoicing. Why? Because they had their own kingdom. Israel's leaders were troubled that Israel's Savior was coming. Is there any stranger thing than that? And yet they were. Then we see Herod's hypocrisy. Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him." Herod knew what he should do, and he says what he will do it. Herod can't plead ignorance here. He knows that he should also go and worship this king. He knows that he's only borrowing this throne. He is a Jew. Not exactly by birth, he was an Edomite, but he was Jewish in religion, at least nominally, and so he knows what he should do, and he even promises he'll do it, but of course he has no desire to do it in his heart. Rather than rejoice in the realization of every hope promised to Israel, Herod will try to bring God's plan to nothing. You know, it's amazing. People can say they believe one thing or the other, but their actions speak much louder than their mouths do when it comes to belief. Did Herod really believe what he said he believed? As a Jew, he should have believed the hopes promised to Israel. He should have believed in the Messiah. And yet, instead, he was actively going to fight against God's plan, which, you know, if he really believed it was God's plan, he wouldn't have fought against it. What his mouth said and what his heart believed could not have been more different. And there's many people that it's the same. They will say one thing, but their actions show that their real beliefs are very different from their professions. The mission concludes. Verses 9 to 11, after listening to the king, they went on their way. And behold, the star that they had seen when it rose went before them until it came to rest over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and they fell down and worshipped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And so their mission concludes. We see they reached their goal. This was a long trip, and I'm sure they were very happy. They were very joyous because they'd finally reached their goal, their long trip. And then once they were there, they gave their best for the king. You know, that's the reason they came, to worship him, to give their best. They gave him costly gifts, the best they had. And even the journey itself was part of their gift, because to come and acknowledge a king in those days, and in any day, when the journey is so difficult, That's part of the gift, is going. And yet they came and they worshiped him, laying their best before him. That was their mission. And they'd completed it. It had concluded. Or had it. Verse 12. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed to their own country by another way. It's interesting. God warned them. They were going back home now. They had reached their goal, and now they were beginning a new mission. We see not only does God protect his son, we'll see that later from Herod, but God protected the wise men too. They didn't go back to Herod. They didn't tell him about what had happened. God revealed Herod's hypocrisy, and they were spared. Maybe had they known Herod's hypocrisy, they would not have told him, but they would have been in danger for their own lives. And so God spared them to go back to the land they came from. They returned to their land and certainly would have told others of their journey and the king they had seen. I can't imagine someone traveling as far as they traveled and seeing what they saw with the star. They probably had already told people before they went on the journey, we've seen the star and we're going to follow it. We're going to find out what it means. Of course, when they came back, people are going to ask, well, what sort of trip was this? Did you find anything, or did you just waste the several months you were gone? What happened? They're going to tell the story. It's part of them now. Think of the privilege they had. They had met the Savior and would be forever changed. This was quite a trip. Think about this. This was a lifetime trip, a once in a lifetime. You can't do this every day. You don't see a star like this every day. Actually, this was a once in a world time event. They had waited. They'd heard the prophecy, and they waited and they moved when they saw that star. You think about the privilege that they had. Only they, in that time, could have gone. And they did. Was this journey worth it? Do you think it was worth their expense? Do you think it was worth their effort? Do you think it was worth all the difficulties they encountered? The danger, maybe bandits, thirst, all sorts of things on this trip. Was this journey worth it? I think it was. But now here's another question for us. How about your journey? Your own life journey. Have you met the Savior in your own life journey? Do you know him? They went and they met him. How about why? Why not, if you haven't? Does your own agenda or kingdom keep you from rejoicing in the Savior? Maybe you met him. Maybe you've heard of him, but you say, I can't give my all to him because I've got this or this. You have your own agenda. You have your own kingdom you want to build, your own desires. Do you love to give him your best gifts and your worship? Just like the wise men, they gave him their journey. They gave him gold, frankincense, and myrrh, the best they had, and they gave him their worship. And I'm sure the wise men would have shared him with others, told of having met him. Do you love to share him with others? And is this journey, this life journey that you're on now, worth it? I'd just like you to leave you with that. God bless.